The first thing I remember wasn't the pain. It was the silence. When I opened my eyes, the room looked washed out under bright hospital lights. Everything felt distant, almost underwater. My chest felt heavy. My right arm wouldn't move without sending a sharp ache through my body. There was a tube taped to the back of my hand, another running across my chest, and a steady machine beside me kept reminding me that I was still alive. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to understand where I was. Then it came back in pieces. The rain. The headlights. The sound of twisting metal. After that, nothing. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. A nurse noticed my eyes open and hurried over with a gentle smile. "Easy," she said softly as she adjusted something beside my bed. "Don't try to move too much. Your surgery went well." Surgery. That one word settled over me before everything else did. I had needed surgery. I swallowed carefully. "How long?" I whispered. "You've been asleep for nearly 18 hours. 18 hours. I blinked slowly, trying to make sense of that number. I worked in healthcare. I knew what 18 hours after emergency surgery usually meant. It meant the injury had been serious. Very serious. Without thinking, I looked toward the doorway. No one was standing there. I waited another few seconds. Still nobody. I wasn't worried yet. My family probably hadn't been allowed inside while I was unconscious. That made sense. Hospitals had rules. Visiting hours. Emergency procedures. I knew all of them better than most people. "They're coming," I asked quietly. The nurse paused for just a second before answering. "I'm sure everyone has been notified." It wasn't exactly the answer I expected. I noticed the hesitation, but I was too exhausted to think much about it. I closed my eyes again. Maybe Mom was driving. Maybe my sister was parking the car. Maybe Dad had finally caught a flight home from overseas. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Over the next hour, different nurses came in and out. Someone checked my blood pressure. Someone adjusted my medication. Someone asked me to rate my pain. The pain was easier to describe than the emptiness sitting beside my bed. Every time the door opened, I looked up. Every single time. Every time it was another nurse. Another doctor. Another technician. Never my family. Late that afternoon, one of my coworkers appeared quietly in the doorway. Her name was Melissa. She worked 2 floors below mine. The moment she saw me awake, relief spread across her face. "Oh, thank goodness," she whispered. She walked over and carefully squeezed my hand. "You scared all of us." I smiled weakly. "I guess I did." She laughed softly, but I could tell she'd been crying before she arrived. She placed a small bouquet of flowers on the table beside my bed. We all signed the card. I looked at the flowers longer than I probably should have. Someone had thought to bring them. People I worked beside every day. People who weren't related to me. "Thank you," I said. Melissa glanced toward the empty chair beside my bed. Then back at me. I saw the question in her eyes before she spoke it. "Has anyone else been here?" I forced a small smile. "Not yet." Her expression changed so quickly she couldn't hide it. She looked surprised, then uncomfortable. "Oh." She tried to recover with another smile. "I'm sure they'll come." "I'm sure." Those were the exact words I used. Even then, I still believed them. Melissa stayed for nearly 30 minutes. She talked about work. The patients everyone was asking about. How everyone was waiting for updates. She kept the conversation light. I appreciated that. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder. "We've all been worried about you." We. The whole unit. After she left, the room felt even quieter than before. I looked again at the empty chair. One chair. Still empty. As evening settled outside the window, another nurse came in carrying medication. She introduced herself as Lauren. She checked my chart before looking at me with kind eyes. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." "I imagine you have." I hesitated before asking the question again. "My family?" She nodded. "Yes." "They know I'm here?" She looked down at the chart in her hands. "They were contacted." "Were they?" "Several times." Something about the way she answered made my stomach tighten. "Several." Yes. I waited. She didn't say anything else. I studied her face. Working in hospitals teaches you how to recognize when someone is choosing their words carefully. Lauren was doing exactly that. They know how serious it was? Another pause. Yes. That answer landed differently. If they knew, why wasn't anyone here? I tried to explain it away. Traffic. Schedules. Flights. Anything. People have complicated lives. Emergencies happen. I had spent years giving families grace when they arrived late to hospitals. Surely I could give my own family the same grace. Couldn't I? That night, sleep came in short pieces. Machines beeped. Hallway carts rolled past my door. Voices drifted in and out before disappearing again. Every time footsteps slowed outside my room, I opened my eyes. Every time they kept walking. By morning, I had started counting the hours. Not since surgery. Since anyone who shared my last name had walked through that door. Another doctor visited during rounds. He explained the operation. Multiple fractures. Internal bleeding. Several hours in surgery. A recovery that would take months. I thanked him for saving my life. He smiled politely before moving on to his next patient. Once he left, I stared out the window. The sun was rising. People were driving to work. Somebody was walking a dog across the hospital parking lot. Life outside kept moving. Mine felt frozen inside this room. Around noon, Lauren returned with fresh medication. She seemed quieter than before. Almost distracted. As she adjusted the four, another nurse stepped into the room carrying paperwork. She didn't realize I was awake. Did her family finally show up? The other nurse asked. Lauren shook her head. No. The room fell silent. The second nurse frowned. I still can't believe someone answered every call. She stopped herself immediately after realizing I was looking straight at her. Lauren gently touched her arm. It's okay, she whispered. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Finally, I looked at Lauren. What do you mean? My voice cracked before I finished. Someone answered every call. Lauren closed her eyes for the briefest moment. When she opened them again, I knew my life was about to change in a way that had nothing to do with the accident. Lying in that hospital bed gave me something I hadn't had in years. Time. There were no patient charts waiting for me. No alarms I needed to answer. No shift to finish. The pain medication dulled the ache in my body, but it couldn't quiet my thoughts. Every hour that passed without my family walking through that door forced me to look backward instead of forward. I wish I could tell you their absence shocked me. It didn't. What shocked me was finally admitting that it fit a pattern I had spent most of my life pretending not to see. When you're the dependable child, people stop asking whether you're okay. They simply expect you to stay okay. That had been my role for as long as I could remember. I was the child who cleaned up after dinner without being asked. The one who remembered birthdays. The one who called relatives first. The one who stayed calm when everyone else became emotional. At first, I thought every family worked that way. It wasn't until I grew older that I realized balance was supposed to go both ways. Mine never did. My younger sister, Claire, had always been the center of every room. If she laughed, everyone laughed with her. If she cried, everything stopped until she felt better. If she wanted something, someone found a way to make it happen. I don't remember being jealous. I remember being confused. Whenever something good happened to me, it somehow became about her. When I brought home excellent grades, my mother would smile politely before saying, "That's wonderful. Now help your sister with her homework." When I graduated near the top of my class, relatives congratulated me for a few minutes before the conversation shifted to Claire's upcoming dance recital. When I earned my nursing license after years of studying, my mother hugged me quickly, then spent the rest of dinner talking about Claire's new apartment. Little things. That's what I called them. Little things don't seem important when they happen once. They become something else when they happen hundreds of times. My father never seemed to notice. For most of my adult life, he worked overseas as an engineering consultant. His projects kept him away for months at a time. He called every weekend without fail. Sometimes we talked while I folded laundry. Sometimes while I drove home from work. He always asked the same question. Are they taking good care of you? I always gave the same answer. We're all doing fine. When Claire won a small local singing competition a year later, all three of us attended. Dad postponed his flight. Mom organized a celebration dinner. I spent hours decorating the house. No one asked whether I had plans. No one noticed that I had quietly canceled them. That was simply what I did. I adjusted. Healthcare suited me because the work made sense. Patients didn't care whether you were the favorite child. They cared whether you listened, whether you showed up, whether you kept your promises. Every shift reminded me that people often reveal who they truly are during someone's worst day. Families slept in waiting rooms for days. Children refused to leave their parents' bedside. Spouses held hands through endless nights. I had seen love measured in uncomfortable chairs, untouched coffee cups, and whispered prayers at 3 in the morning. Maybe that was why my own empty hospital room felt impossible to ignore. I knew what showing up looked like, because I had watched strangers do it every single day. One afternoon, my physical therapist helped me take my first slow walk down the hallway. Every step hurt. My ribs protested. My leg trembled. But moving felt better than lying still. As we passed other rooms, I couldn't help noticing the visitors. A teenage boy laughed with his grandparents. An elderly woman argued playfully with her husband about hospital food. A little girl slept with her head resting on her mother's shoulder. No family looked perfect. Some were tired. Some looked frightened. Some hadn't gone home in days. But they were there. Presence mattered more than perfection. When I returned to my room, I found another small bouquet sitting beside the first one. This one came from the emergency department staff. The attached card was covered with signatures. Some belonged to people I barely knew. One message simply read, "Take your time. We'll cover your shifts. Just get better." I smiled despite myself. Sometimes kindness arrives from the people who owe you nothing. Late that evening, Melissa visited again. She brought me fresh socks, lip balm, and a paperback novel. I figured hospitals always forget the little things, she joked. They do. She pulled the visitor chair closer. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Work gossip. Patients who had finally gone home. The cafeteria's terrible coffee. Normal conversations felt comforting. Then her smile faded. "I almost asked you something yesterday," she admitted. "What?" "I didn't think it was my place." I looked at her quietly. "You can ask." She hesitated. "Has your dad been able to get here?" I shook my head. "He's still overseas." "Does he know?" "As far as I know." The words sounded uncertain even to me. Melissa looked down at her hands. "I hope someone explained everything to him." That sentence stayed with me long after she left. Someone explained everything. Or maybe someone hadn't. Until then, I had assumed my father knew exactly what had happened. But the more I thought about it, the less certain I became. He would have caught the first flight home. He always did when something serious happened. Years earlier, when I caught pneumonia during nursing school, he flew home for 48 hours just to make sure I was recovering. He had never missed the moments that mattered. Unless someone had convinced him there wasn't a reason to come. The idea settled into my mind so quietly that I almost pushed it away. Almost. The next morning, while checking my chart, Lauren walked into the room carrying a sealed hospital envelope. "I think this belongs to you," she said gently. "What is it?" "It's a copy of your admission file." I frowned. "I didn't ask for it." "No," she replied softly. "But after everything that's happened, I thought you might want to see the communication log." She placed the envelope on my bedside table. I stared at it without opening it. Somehow, I already knew the answers inside would hurt. I just didn't know how much. I stared at the sealed envelope for almost an hour before I touched it. It wasn't because I was afraid of paperwork. I had spent years working in hospitals. Medical forms, admission records, and communication logs were part of my daily life. Normally, I could read them without feeling anything. This time was different. This file wasn't about one of my patients. It was about me. I finally picked it up, slid my finger under the flap, and slowly pulled out the papers. The first few pages were exactly what I expected. My ambulance arrival time, my injuries, the emergency scans, the surgeon's notes. Reading the words felt strangely unreal. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, emergency surgery recommended immediately, risk of significant complications. I already knew I had almost died. Seeing it written in black ink made it impossible to pretend otherwise. Then I reached the communication log. Every hospital keeps one. Every phone call made to a patient's emergency contacts is documented with the time, the number dialed, whether someone answered, and often a short summary of the conversation. I had completed hundreds of those logs myself during my career. Now I was reading my own. The first call had been placed only 12 minutes after I arrived in the emergency department. My mother answered. The note was short. Emergency contact informed of serious motor vehicle accident. Patient requires immediate surgery. Family encouraged to come to hospital immediately. I kept reading. The second call came 43 minutes later. My mother answered again. Family updated. Surgery beginning shortly. Condition remains critical. The third call was made while I was still in the operating room. Again, she answered. Patient remains in surgery. Prognosis uncertain. I stopped reading for a moment. There was no mistake. No missed calls. No voicemail. She had answered every time. I remembered what the nurse had accidentally said the day before. Someone answered every call. Now I knew who. I turned the page. The fourth entry caught my attention. Family stated they were unable to come at this time. Unable. Such a small word. It could mean almost anything. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe there had been an emergency of their own. I wanted to believe there had been a good reason. The log didn't explain. But someone else did. A quiet knock came at my door. Lauren stepped inside. She looked at the papers spread across my bed and immediately understood. You read it. I nodded. I have one question. She pulled the chair closer. If I can answer it. What does unable to come mean? Lauren was silent for several seconds. I probably shouldn't. You don't have to protect anyone, I said gently. I just want the truth. She folded her hands together. I wasn't the one who made every call, she said. But I was standing at the nurse's station during 2 of them. I waited. The charge nurse explained how serious your condition was. My chest tightened. She made it very clear? Very clear. Lauren looked down before continuing. There wasn't. She continued quietly. Later that afternoon, another call was made. I looked back at the communication log. There isn't much detail written here. No. What happened? Lauren hesitated. The charge nurse tried one last time to explain that your condition hadn't improved. And? The response was. She stopped herself. What? Lauren let out a slow breath. They said someone had already scheduled a veterinary appointment for the family dog. I blinked. I'm sorry. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. Because even then, my mind refused to accept what I had heard. A veterinary appointment. While I was lying on an operating table. People can postpone appointments. People cannot postpone dying. Lauren reached over and gently rested her hand on the blanket. I wish I were telling you something different. So do I. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing louder in my mind. My father. She looked at me. Was he called? She checked the papers. His overseas number was listed. I know. There was one attempt. What happened? The person who answered your emergency contact information requested that we stop calling internationally because your father was working. I frowned. Requested. Yes. Who made that request? Lauren didn't answer immediately. The same person who answered the earlier calls. My mother. I already knew the answer before she said it. They told us your father had already been informed. I looked down at the papers again. He wasn't. I didn't know that. I do. Because my father would never ignore something like this. Never. He had crossed oceans for smaller emergencies. Years ago, he flew home because I had pneumonia. Another time he delayed an important project just to attend my nursing graduation. He wasn't perfect. But when it truly mattered, he showed up. Unless someone made sure he didn't know. The thought settled heavily inside me. For the first time since waking up, I stopped wondering why my father hadn't come. Instead, I began wondering what he had actually been told. The answer mattered. Maybe more than anything else. Later that afternoon, my surgeon stopped by during his rounds. He reviewed my latest scans and smiled. "You're healing better than expected." "That's good to hear. You've been lucky." Lucky. It was an interesting word. I almost died. My family stayed away. And somehow I was the lucky one. Before leaving, he paused. "I don't usually say this to patients." I looked up. "But your coworkers checked on you almost every day." I smiled faintly. "They're good people." "They certainly are." He hesitated before adding one more sentence. "I expected your family to be here." After he left, those words echoed through the room. So had everyone else. Everyone had expected them. Everyone except the people who actually mattered. That evening, Melissa returned carrying fresh fruit and another card signed by the night shift. She noticed the papers on my bed. "You finally looked?" I did. She sat quietly beside me. "You don't have to tell me." "I think I do." So I explained everything. The phone calls. The wedding preparations. The veterinary appointment. My father being kept in the dark. Melissa listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she rubbed her eyes. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to." She looked at me for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the window. The sun was beginning to set. Orange light stretched across the parking lot below. Cars came and went. Visitors hugged their loved ones before leaving. Life continued outside my room. Inside, something had quietly ended. "I'm not going to argue." Melissa looked surprised. "I'm not going to call them." "Why?" "Because people usually reveal who they are when they think no one is watching." I looked back at the communication log. They already made their choice. Silence filled the room. Not the lonely silence from before. A different kind. The kind that comes after a painful truth finally settles into place. That night, I pulled a blank sheet of paper from the hospital drawer. I held a pen over it for several seconds before writing the first sentence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't writing to ask my family for understanding. I was writing to tell them I had finally found my own. The hardest part wasn't writing the letter. It was realizing how little I needed to say. For most of my life, I believed that if I found the right words, my family would finally understand me. I thought one honest conversation could fix years of distance. I imagined there was a sentence I hadn't tried yet, an explanation I hadn't given clearly enough. Lying in that hospital bed changed that. People who truly want to understand you don't usually need a perfect speech. They simply pay attention. My family had been given every reason to come. The hospital had called again and again. They knew I might not survive surgery. They knew where I was. They knew how serious it was. And they still stayed away. No letter could change that. I picked up the pen and began writing anyway. Not because I expected them to apologize. Not because I wanted revenge. I wrote because I wanted to leave without carrying words that no longer belonged inside me. The letter wasn't long. I thanked them for teaching me something I should have learned years earlier. I told them that surviving the accident had shown me who truly stood beside me when life became uncertain. I reminded them that every choice has consequences, even the quiet ones. Then I ended with one simple sentence. "I hope one day you understand that showing up is the greatest expression of love." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside an envelope. For the first time in years, I felt strangely calm. Not happy, not relieved, just calm. A few days later, my doctors told me I was well enough to leave the hospital. Recovery would take months. I would need physical therapy. I wouldn't be able to return to work anytime soon. None of that surprised me. The surprise came when discharge day arrived. No one from my family came to pick me up. Instead, Melissa parked outside the hospital entrance 30 minutes early. She walked in carrying a small overnight bag and smiled when she saw me sitting in the wheelchair. "Ready?" "I think so." She looked around the waiting area. "No one else coming?" I shook my head. I didn't ask anyone. She didn't question my answer. She simply picked up my bag and thanked the nurse who had wheeled me downstairs. As we slowly walked toward the parking lot, I looked back at the hospital entrance. It felt strange leaving a place where complete strangers had shown me more kindness than the people who had known me my entire life. Lauren happened to be finishing her shift. She spotted me from across the entrance and hurried over. "I'm glad you're finally going home." "So am I." She smiled warmly. "You've got a long recovery ahead." "I know." Then her expression became more serious. "Can I give you one piece of advice?" "Of course." "Don't rush back into taking care of everyone else." I laughed softly. "You figured me out." "It wasn't difficult." She folded her arms. "Healthcare workers are usually the worst patients." "I've heard that." "No," she said with a smile. "You're worse." For the first time since the accident, I laughed without forcing it. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder gently. "Take care of yourself first." "I'll try." "No." She smiled again. "Promise." "I promise." Melissa helped me into her car. The ride to her apartment was quiet. She had insisted I stay in her guest room until I could safely manage on my own. I protested several times. She ignored every protest. "That's what friends are for," she said. Those words stayed with me. Friends. Not relatives. Friends. The first week of recovery passed slowly. Walking across a room felt like climbing a mountain. Simple tasks exhausted me. Most afternoons I slept for hours. Melissa worked long shifts, but every evening she checked on me before asking the same question. "Need anything?" Most nights my answer was the same. "I'm okay." One afternoon, while she was at work, I found myself staring at my phone. There was still no missed call from my mother. No message from Claire. No apology. Nothing. Part of me wondered whether they had even noticed I was gone. Then another thought entered my mind. My father. Everything about his absence felt wrong. He wasn't the kind of man who ignored emergencies. If he knew the truth, he would have been sitting beside my hospital bed before I even woke up. I couldn't stop thinking about that. For 3 days, I argued with myself. Maybe I should leave it alone. Maybe he already knew. Maybe I would only make things worse. But another voice kept asking a different question. What if he had been lied to? That possibility refused to leave me. Finally, I dialed his international number. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, kiddo." Hearing his voice nearly broke something inside me. I hadn't spoken to him since before the accident. "Hi, Dad. You sound tired." "I've had a rough couple of weeks." He already knew. When he spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper. "I would have come." "I know." "I would have left everything." "I know." "I would never." "I know, Dad." Those 3 words seemed to hurt him more than anything else. He understood what they meant. I had never believed he abandoned me. I believed he had been kept away. After several minutes, he spoke again. "I need to see you." "I know. I'm flying home." "You still have that project." "I don't care." I smiled sadly. "I know you don't." He took a deep breath. "When I get home, I want to understand everything." "You should." "I'm asking you to let me see it for myself." "I will." "I don't want rumors." "You won't get rumors." "I want facts." "You'll have them." When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. I hadn't told him everything. Not yet. I hadn't mentioned the wedding. I hadn't mentioned the veterinary appointment. I hadn't mentioned the unanswered hospital visits. He deserved to discover those things with clear eyes instead of hearing them through anger. Truth doesn't need shouting. It only needs evidence. Over the following days, my body slowly became stronger. One morning, during a follow-up appointment, my physician reviewed my latest blood work. Everything looked encouraging. As he flipped through the pages, he paused briefly. What?" "Nothing serious." He smiled. "I was just double-checking your blood type." I nodded. "Oh, negative." "Yes." He continued looking through my records. "Interesting." I frowned. "What is?" He pointed toward an older section of my medical file. "Family history." I looked at the page without really understanding. He smiled casually. Medical records can be funny sometimes. Then he changed the subject and continued discussing my recovery. He probably forgot the comment before I even left the office. I didn't. Something about the way he had paused stayed with me. At the time, I couldn't explain why. I only knew that one ordinary medical observation had quietly planted a question in my mind. It would be weeks before I understood just how dangerous that question really was. Some questions refuse to leave you alone. The comment my doctor made about my blood type should have been easy to forget. It lasted only a few seconds during an ordinary follow-up appointment. He hadn't sounded worried. He hadn't suggested there was a medical problem. He simply paused, looked at my chart, and called something interesting. Most people would have let it go. I couldn't. Working in healthcare had taught me to respect small details. Sometimes the smallest observation uncovered the biggest problem. A patient might mention one unusual symptom that changed an entire diagnosis. A tiny change in lab work could point toward something much larger hiding beneath the surface. That habit stayed with me even when I became the patient. A few days later, I found myself thinking about that moment again. I logged into my patient portal and reviewed my own medical records. My blood type was exactly what I had always known. O negative. Nothing unusual there. Then I opened the section labeled Family Medical History. The information had been copied forward from older records over the years. My father's blood type was listed. My mother's blood type was listed. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. Something didn't seem right. Not because I immediately knew the answer. Because I knew just enough genetics to recognize that I should ask questions instead of making assumptions. Healthcare teaches you something important. Never jump to conclusions. Evidence comes first. Theories come later. I closed my laptop. For the next 2 days, I forced myself not to think about it. Physical therapy demanded most of my energy anyway. Walking without assistance was still difficult. Simple exercises left my muscles shaking. Recovery gave me little time to chase old mysteries. But the questions stayed in the back of my mind. Finally, during another appointment, I asked my physician. I've been wondering about something. He looked up from his notes. What is it? You mentioned my blood type the other day. Oh, you called something interesting. He smiled politely. I probably shouldn't have said it that way. What did you notice? He leaned back in his chair. It may be nothing. I understand. You know, blood type inheritance isn't always as straightforward as people think. I nodded. I do. There are rare situations, unusual genetic combinations, recording mistakes. He shrugged. Medical records aren't perfect. So you're saying it could simply be paperwork? Absolutely. He smiled again. I wouldn't lose sleep over it. That answer should have settled everything. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Because he never actually said the records were correct. Only that they could be wrong. On my drive home, I stopped at a small pharmacy to pick up medication. While waiting, I found myself browsing a medical reference book displayed near the counter. Blood type inheritance. Simple diagrams. Basic explanations. Nothing complicated. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for understanding. By the time I returned to Melissa's apartment, I had filled several pages in a notebook. Possible explanations. Questions. Things to verify. Nothing more. I refused to accuse anyone based on incomplete information. That wasn't who I was. A week later, my father finally arrived home. He came directly from the airport. When Melissa opened the apartment door, he looked older than I remembered. Not because of time. Because of worry. The moment he saw me standing with a cane, tears filled his eyes. He crossed the room and hugged me carefully, afraid of hurting my healing ribs. I'm so sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. I should have been here. I looked at him quietly. You would have been. He nodded slowly. I would have. We sat together for hours. For the first time in years, there were no distractions. No rushed phone calls. No work schedules. Just the two of us. He asked about the accident. The surgery. Recovery. The doctors. He listened more than he spoke. When I finished telling him everything that had happened inside the hospital, he sat silently for several minutes. Then he asked one question. "Can I see the communication log?" I handed him the copies Lauren had given me. He read every page without speaking. His jaw tightened. His hands remained perfectly still. When he finished, he folded the papers neatly and placed them back on the table. "I need to verify everything." "I understand. I'm not saying I doubt you. I know. I just—" He paused. "I need facts." I nodded. "So do I." That conversation reminded me why I trusted him. He wasn't rushing toward anger. He was moving toward truth. Over the following week, he quietly began checking details for himself. He contacted the hospital. He requested copies of records he was legally allowed to receive. He confirmed the dates, the phone calls, the surgery timeline. He didn't argue with anyone. He simply collected information. Watching him work taught me something. Truth doesn't become stronger because someone raises their voice. It becomes stronger because the facts keep matching. Meanwhile, another question quietly continued growing inside me. The blood type. One afternoon, I visited my Aunt Helen. She was my father's older sister and the unofficial keeper of every family photograph ever taken. If anyone remembered old family stories, it was her. She greeted me warmly and insisted I sit before she brought out tea. "You've gotten too thin," she said. "I've heard that all week." "Good." She smiled. "Then people are paying attention." After we talked about my recovery, she disappeared into a hallway closet. A few minutes later, she returned carrying several heavy photo albums. "I thought your father might enjoy these when he comes over." We began flipping through them together. Vacations, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, school pictures, ordinary moments frozen in time. Then I noticed something. One photograph had a handwritten date on the back. Another had a different date than I expected. I frowned slightly. "Aunt Helen." "Yes." "When was Claire born?" She answered immediately. "You know that." "I do. I'm just checking something." She smiled. 32 years ago." She continued turning pages. Then she stopped. "Oh. What?" "I always forget about this." She pulled out another picture. My mother was standing beside a lake. She looked heavily pregnant. The date written underneath caught my attention. It didn't seem to match the timeline I had always believed. Maybe the handwriting was wrong. Maybe the photograph had been developed later. There were dozens of innocent explanations. Still, I made a quiet note in my notebook. Questions, not conclusions. As I prepared to leave, Aunt Helen smiled. "You've always been like your father." "In what way?" "You both notice little things everyone else misses." I laughed softly. "Sometimes that's a blessing. And sometimes it changes everything." She didn't realize how true those words might become. Over the next several days, more small details appeared. A family story told 2 different ways. An old vacation remembered by different relatives. Dates that almost matched. Almost. None of it proved anything. But together they formed a puzzle that refused to disappear. I never confronted my mother. I never questioned Claire. I didn't even tell my father what I was beginning to suspect. There still wasn't enough evidence. Only possibilities. One evening, while organizing paperwork, my father looked up from the dining table. "I found something strange." I looked at him. "What?" He slid an old document across the table. It wasn't dramatic. Just another ordinary record. But one date immediately caught my attention. It fit perfectly with another photograph I had seen earlier that week. Neither of us spoke. We simply looked at each other. For the first time, we were both following the same trail. And for the first time, I realized the truth waiting at the end of it might be far bigger than either of us had imagined. One strange fact can be ignored. 2 can be explained away. But after enough pieces begin fitting together, the truth starts speaking for itself. That was where my father and I found ourselves. Neither of us wanted to believe anything was seriously wrong. Neither of us was looking for a scandal. We were simply following the evidence wherever it led. The old document my father had found matched one of the photographs from Aunt Helen's albums almost perfectly. A second record confirmed another date. Then another memory shared by a relative quietly filled in another gap. Each discovery was small on its own. Together, they painted a picture neither of us recognized. One evening, my father spread several papers across Melissa's dining table. Hospital records, old family photographs, travel dates, employment records. A faded calendar page that had somehow survived more than 30 years. He looked at everything for a long time before speaking. I keep hoping one of these is wrong. So do I. But they keep agreeing with each other. I nodded slowly. They do. Neither of us raised our voices. There was nothing to argue with. Facts don't respond to emotion. They simply remain. For several days, we stopped searching. Not because we had lost interest. Because we both needed time to think. I spent those days continuing physical therapy. My body was healing faster than my heart. Some mornings I could walk without my cane for several minutes. Other mornings, every step reminded me of the accident. Healing isn't a straight line. Neither is discovering the truth. One afternoon, my father asked if we could drive to the old family house. My mother and Claire were both out shopping. The house was quiet. Walking through those rooms felt strange. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. The framed family photographs still lined the hallway. The same clock still hung above the fireplace. The same furniture sat in the same places. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Dad quietly opened an old storage cabinet. I want to look for one thing. What? Your baby records. We searched together for nearly an hour. Most boxes contained ordinary memories. School report cards. Old tax papers. Birthday decorations. Then my father found a small plastic folder tucked beneath several photo albums. Inside were birth certificates, vaccination cards, and hospital bracelets from when Claire and I were born. He carefully placed everything on the dining table. Neither of us spoke. He compared dates, names, hospital locations. Then he stopped. His expression changed. What is it? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me one of the papers. I looked at it. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply another small detail. But it matched something we had already found. Another piece of the same puzzle. Another impossible coincidence. My father slowly sat down. I don't understand. I looked at him. Maybe there's an explanation. I've been saying that for weeks. So have I. But explanations are becoming harder to find. He rubbed both hands across his face. For the first time since coming home, he looked truly exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. That evening he made one decision. I'm requesting a DNA test. I looked at him quietly. Are you sure? No. He answered honestly. I'm not sure of anything anymore. He looked toward the family photographs hanging on the wall. But I can't keep wondering. I understood. Neither of us wanted revenge. We wanted certainty. The testing process took time. Longer than either of us expected. Those days felt endless. My mother seemed unusually nervous whenever my father asked simple questions about old family events. Nothing accusatory. Nothing aggressive. Just ordinary questions. What year did we visit your parents? When did Claire start preschool? Which hospital was Rachel born in? Simple questions. Simple answers. Yet my mother hesitated more often than she used to. She laughed too quickly. Changed subjects. Left rooms before conversations ended. I noticed it. So did my father. Still, neither of us confronted her. Not yet. Truth deserves patience. One afternoon, she unexpectedly came to Melissa's apartment. I opened the door myself. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked around before asking, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside. She sat on the couch without removing her coat. You've been avoiding us. I've been recovering. You left that letter. I did. She folded her hands together. You embarrassed the family. I looked at her quietly. I almost died. I know. The hospital called. I know. You didn't come. Silence. She looked toward the window instead of answering. Finally, she spoke. Claire's wedding needed to stay on schedule. I couldn't believe those words had actually been spoken aloud. My surgery didn't. She sighed impatiently. Don't make this bigger than it already is. I stared at her. I didn't. She did not apologize. Not once. Instead, she talked about appearances. Neighbors. Relatives. What people might think. Every sentence centered on protecting the family's image, not repairing the family itself. Eventually, she stood to leave. Before reaching the door, she turned around. Your father has been asking too many questions. I didn't answer. It would be better if everyone simply moved on. Again, I stayed silent. After she left, I realized something. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for silence. Those are very different things. 3 days later, my father called. The results are back. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. When? This afternoon. I'll come over. No. He paused. I'll bring them. When he arrived, he carried a single sealed envelope. He placed it carefully on the table between us. Neither of us reached for it immediately. Finally, he opened it. His eyes moved slowly across the pages. Then he closed them. I already knew. He handed me the report. The scientific language was formal, clinical, emotionless. But the conclusion was unmistakable. One child in our family was not biologically his. The room became completely silent. No shouting, no tears, just silence. My father remained still for a long time. Finally, he spoke. I spent 32 years believing something that wasn't true. I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over his. I'm sorry. He nodded. So am I. He wasn't grieving biology. He was grieving trust. Later that evening, he asked my mother to meet him privately. I wasn't there. He wanted that conversation to belong to the two of them. Hours passed before he returned. His face told me everything before he spoke. She admitted it. I closed my eyes. Did she explain? Eventually. The affair had happened decades earlier. A brief relationship. One terrible decision. Then years of silence. She had convinced herself the truth would only hurt everyone. So she buried it. Year after year. Lie after lie. My father sat quietly. The hardest part isn't the affair. I looked at him. It's every day afterward. He was right. One mistake lasts a moment. The decision to hide it lasts a lifetime. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. The following afternoon, my mother asked to meet me alone. She arrived carrying a small envelope. Without sitting down, she placed it on the table. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount was enough to change someone's life. What is this? Take it. I looked up. For what? So this ends. I slowly pushed the envelope back toward her. No. You haven't even looked at the amount. I don't need to. She became frustrated. Think about your father. I am. Think about Claire. I am. Think about this family. I met her eyes. I finally am. She took a slow breath. If this gets out, everything we've built will disappear. I answered quietly. The truth doesn't destroy a family. She frowned. What does then? Lies that last 30 years. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she picked up the envelope without another word and walked away. I watched her leave. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Only sadness. Because I finally understood something. Money can buy silence. It cannot buy peace. And somewhere beyond that conversation, another decision was already beginning to take shape. My father wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about what came after the truth. The wedding happened exactly as planned. That was the strange part. Life-changing truths had come to light. A family secret that had been hidden for more than 3 decades had finally been uncovered. Trust had been broken in ways that could never be completely repaired. And yet, the wedding continued. Flowers were ordered. Guests arrived. Pictures were taken. Smiles appeared on people's faces. From the outside, everything looked normal. But I knew better. Sometimes the biggest changes happen quietly before anyone else notices. My father had made a decision. He would not destroy Claire's wedding day. Not because he was pretending nothing happened. Not because he had forgiven everything. Because he understood something important. A celebration built around someone else's happiness did not need to become a battlefield for someone else's pain. This day belongs to Claire, he told me the night before the wedding. We were sitting outside Melissa's apartment. The evening was calm. For the first time in weeks, neither of us was looking through old records or searching for answers. We were simply sitting. I don't understand how you can still go, I said. He looked toward the street. I don't understand either. I smiled slightly. Then he continued. But I know who I want to be. That sentence stayed with me. Because my father had every reason to be angry. Every reason to expose everything. Every reason to walk away before the ceremony even began. But he chose something different. Control. Dignity. Peace. The morning of the wedding, my mother called me. Her voice sounded different. Not softer. Just more careful. Are you coming? Yes. There was a pause. I appreciate that. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't going for her. I wasn't going to protect a secret. I wasn't going to pretend the past weeks hadn't happened. I was going because I had made peace with something. I couldn't control other people's choices. I could only control my own. When I arrived at the venue, everything looked beautiful. White flowers covered the entrance. Guests walked around holding glasses and laughing. Music played softly in the background. Everyone was dressed perfectly. It was the kind of scene my mother had always cared about. Appearance. Perception. The image of a perfect family. I watched her greet relatives with a smile. She looked comfortable. Almost. My mother positioned everyone carefully. Closer. Smile. Everyone look here. She adjusted people's positions like she was arranging a perfect picture. I stood beside my father. For the first time in years, I noticed something. He didn't look broken. He looked tired. There was a difference. Broken people stop moving. Tired people keep going. The photographer raised his camera. Everyone ready? People smiled. The picture was taken. A moment frozen forever. A picture that would look happy to anyone who didn't know the story behind it. That was always the strange thing about families. A photograph can show who is standing there. It cannot show who is truly present. After the reception ended, my father and I returned to the hotel. Neither of us spoke much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. We had learned that silence could mean many things. Sometimes it meant pain. Sometimes it meant thinking. Sometimes it meant acceptance. The next morning, my father made his decision official. He met with an attorney. He filed for divorce. There was no public announcement. No angry statement. No attempt to embarrass my mother. He simply ended a marriage that no longer had honesty at its foundation. When my mother found out, she was furious. Not because the truth had been discovered. Because the consequences had finally arrived. She called me that evening. You knew this would happen. I sat quietly. What? You knew your father would leave. No. My answer surprised even me. I knew my father would make his own choice. She became quiet. You think you understand everything. No. I looked out the window. I just understand what happened. She wanted me to feel guilty. I could hear it in her voice. For years, guilt had been the easiest way to control me. But something had changed. I no longer needed their approval to know my worth. I never wanted this, I told her. Then why did you tell him? I closed my eyes. Because he deserved the truth. The line went silent. Because there was no argument against that. Truth was not an attack. Honesty was not cruelty. Eventually she whispered, you ruined everything. I looked around Melissa's apartment. At the small room where I had recovered. At the flowers coworkers had sent. At the cards from people who cared. And I realized something. I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stopped holding together something that was already broken. A few weeks later, I heard that the man involved in my mother's affair had been contacted. For years, my mother had protected him too. She believed he would help her if the truth ever surfaced. She was wrong. When confronted, he denied responsibility. He said the past was the past. He wanted no part in the consequences. That was when my mother finally understood something. The people she had protected were not necessarily the people who would protect her. The person she had spent years choosing over honesty disappeared when honesty became expensive. My father, meanwhile, began rebuilding his life. Slowly. Quietly. He started visiting more often. We talked about things we had avoided for years. Not just what happened, but why I had stayed silent for so long. One evening, he asked me a question I never expected. Why didn't you tell me before? I knew exactly what he meant. Not about the accident. About everything. The years of feeling invisible. The moments I had been overlooked. The times I had needed him. I looked down at my hands. Because I didn't want to become another problem you had to solve. His face changed. That sentence hurt him more than any accusation could have. You were never a problem. I know that now. He reached across the table. I wish you knew it then. That was the hardest part of healing. Not discovering who had lied. Not discovering who had failed. It was accepting that some apologies arrive after the damage is already done. They can bring comfort. But they cannot rewrite history. Still, they matter. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting what happened. It comes from finally being seen. And for the first time in my life, I used to believe that the hardest part of being hurt was the moment it happened. I was wrong. The hardest part came afterward. It was learning how to live with the truth. Learning how to stop searching for answers that would never change what happened. Learning how to accept that some people can share your name, your history, and your memories, but still not be the people who stand beside you when you need them most. My recovery took months. My body healed slowly. Some days were better than others. There were mornings when I could walk around the house without thinking about every movement. Then there were mornings when a simple step reminded me of the accident. But the physical pain became easier. The emotional pain was different. That took longer. After everything happened, my relationship with my father changed. Not overnight. Not magically. Healing doesn't happen because someone says sorry once. It happens through small choices repeated over time. My father started showing up. Not because he was trying to make up for lost years. He knew he couldn't. He showed up because he finally understood something he should have known all along. Presence matters. A few months after the divorce was finalized, he visited me on a quiet Sunday afternoon. We sat outside on the porch, drinking coffee. For once, there was no paperwork between us. No medical records. No family photographs. No evidence to review. Just two people having a conversation. I think about that day often, he said. I looked at him. The accident? He shook his head. No. He looked down at his coffee cup. The day you woke up in that hospital room and nobody from your family was there. I didn't answer. Because there was nothing to say. I should have known something was wrong. Dad. No. He gently raised his hand. Let me say this. I stayed quiet. I spent years believing everything was fine because nobody told me otherwise. He paused. But I should have looked closer. I looked away toward the yard. The old version of me would have immediately said it wasn't his fault. The old version of me would have rushed to make him feel better. But I had learned something important. Comforting everyone else while ignoring yourself is not kindness. Sometimes it is just another way of disappearing. So I answered honestly. I missed you. His eyes became wet. I know. No. I shook my head. I don't think you do. He looked at me. I needed you there. The words were difficult to say. Not because they were untrue. Because I had spent my entire life avoiding them. I needed you when I felt invisible. My father looked down. I thought you were strong. I was. I took a breath. But strong people need someone too. That sentence stayed between us. Neither of us tried to fix it. Neither of us tried to erase the past. We simply allowed it to exist. And somehow, that was enough. Over time, I learned to stop measuring my worth by the attention I received from people who failed to see me. For years, I had thought being chosen by my family would prove that I mattered. I thought if my mother noticed me, if Claire respected me, if I finally became important enough, then I would feel complete. But the accident taught me something I should have understood much earlier. Being ignored by the wrong people does not make you invisible. It only reveals that they were looking in the wrong direction. My coworkers remained some of the strongest support I had. The people who signed cards for me. The people who checked on my recovery. The people who covered my shifts. They didn't share my blood. They didn't grow up with me. They didn't owe me anything. And yet, they showed up. That mattered. Melissa once told me something while we were having lunch. You know what I noticed? What? You keep talking about the people who weren't there. I smiled. Because it hurt. I know. She took a sip of her coffee. But don't forget the people who were. That sentence changed the way I looked at everything. For so long, I had focused on the empty chair beside my hospital bed. I forgot about all the people who filled the spaces around me. The nurses. The doctors. My coworkers. My friends. The people who answered without being asked. The people who cared without needing a reason. They became my reminder that family is not only something you're born into. Sometimes it is something you find. I still think about my mother sometimes. Not with anger. Not with the desire to punish her. Just with sadness. Because I wonder how different everything could have been if she had chosen honesty sooner. If she had valued people more than appearances. If protecting a family meant protecting the hearts inside it, not just the image people saw from the outside. But those choices belonged to her. Not me. That was another lesson I had to learn. You cannot force someone to become the person you needed them to be. You can only decide who you become after they disappoint you. My sister and I rarely speak now. Our relationship changed permanently. Some things cannot return to the way they were before. And maybe that is okay. Not every ending is a tragedy. Sometimes distance is simply the space needed for peace. My father continues to rebuild his life. He doesn't talk about the past often. Neither do I. Not because we are pretending it didn't happen. Because we have accepted that it did. Acceptance is different from approval. It means you stop fighting reality. You stop asking why someone couldn't love you the way you needed. And you start asking a better question. Who chooses me now? That question changed everything. Looking back, the accident was the moment my life almost ended. But it was also the moment something else began. For the first time, I stopped begging to be seen by people who had already decided not to look. I stopped explaining my value. I stopped waiting for permission to matter. I learned that quiet strength does not need an audience. It does not need revenge. It does not need a dramatic victory. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away with your dignity still intact. The truth eventually came out. The lies were exposed. The family I thought I had was changed forever. But the person I became afterward was stronger than the person I was before. And maybe that was the greatest discovery of all. Family is not proven by shared blood. It is proven by shared loyalty. By the people who answer the phone. By the people who sit beside your hospital bed. By the people who stay when staying is difficult. So, I want to ask you something. If the people you loved ignored you during the moment you needed them most, would you keep fighting for their approval, or would you finally choose yourself? Share your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about betrayal, healing, quiet strength, and the moments when truth changes everything, subscribe. There are more powerful stories waiting for you.